Glucose, an essential 6-carbon sugar, is very polar due to its many hydroxyl groups. It cannot cross the plasma membrane of cells because it is not lipid-soluble and is too large to fit through the channel. Transport of glucose between the blood and intracellular membrane is therefore reliant on a glucose transporter, also known as GLUT. Glucose binds the transporter, which undergoes a conformational change. Glucose moves into the cell and is phosphorylated to glucose 6-phosphate. The molecule is now negatively charged due to the presence of a phosphate group and cannot leave the cell, unlike plain glucose, which can travel bidirectionally. Glucose 6-phosphate is then oxidized to ATP. There is a high concentration of glucose in the blood compared to the intracellular environment. This allows glucose molecules to move down a concentration gradient by facilitated diffusion via a carrier, the glucose transporter. Although 14 GLUTs have been identified, this video focuses on GLUTs 1 to 4. GLUT3 is the main transporter of glucose into neurons. GLUT1 is found in most cells of the body, predominantly blood cells, and is responsible for transporting glucose across the blood-brain barrier. GLUT1 and GLUT3 have a higher affinity for glucose compared to the other glucose transporters, which often are not activated until after a sharp rise in blood glucose levels after a carbohydrate-rich meal. This means at lower blood glucose concentrations, blood is directed to the brain before other organs. This is essential as the brain is the main organ in the body which requires a constant supply of glucose for its minute-to-minute energy needs. GLUT2 is found in the liver, pancreas, small intestine, and kidney. GLUT2 transport of glucose is dependent on a sodium and glucose cotransporter, SGLT. There is a higher concentration of sodium in the intestinal lumen than in the epithelial cell. SGLT uses the sodium concentration gradient to simultaneously move sodium ions downhill and glucose uphill from lumen into cell. This establishes a glucose concentration gradient, and GLUT passively moves glucose downhill out of the cell into the blood via facilitated diffusion. GLUT4 is found in skeletal muscle and adipose tissue. It's the only transporter that is insulin dependent. Insulin binds to its receptor on the surface membrane of the target cells. Subsequent signaling pathway induces the insertion of GLUT4 molecules into the plasma membrane. So an increase in insulin results in an increase in glucose uptake by these cells.